inputs into this document. It's just one document. Over the past 5 years, the Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation and the National Planning Commission have been monitoring and evaluating government's work, collecting and analyzing information relating to the priorities, and also making recommendations for addressing challenges and future planning. This includes the delivery agreements for 12 outcomes, the diagnostic report and the National Planning Commission, as well as a number of evaluations of government's programs that DPME has carried out. We have drawn on these evaluations and on the planning work in order to produce this review. So you can see that it is actually a document that's carrying facts, as the President would say. I'm very pleased, ladies and gentlemen, that we have now reached a point where the document is ready to be released by the President to the public. We hope that it'll be a document that will be used as reference source, but also to celebrate. And that celebration would be undertaken by different groups in the society, including ourselves in government, the academic institutions, and academia people in general, and civil society groupings, business and labor, as well as anyone interested in history, politics, and development in our country, and also how to take our country forward. We also hope that it will stimulate informed discussions going forward about our progress and challenges that we still face, which we need to go through. The President himself, ladies and gentlemen, has actually provided very strong leadership and guidance in drafting this document and in also seeing us through this process, and also provided a very invaluable inputs into the process. And through you, Chairperson, I would like to really thank the President very heartily and say through you, we are looking forward to President releasing this document to South Africans today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Minister Molewa. The long walk of Mandela has not yet ended, but now the long journey since 1994 of a very good story about the new democracy is about to be unveiled. It is therefore my singular honor to request His Excellency, the President of the Republic of South Africa, to deliver the main address and to release the 20-year review.
Thank you, Minister. Jeff Khadebe. I should not interfere with these instruments, no? I should leave them there. Okay. Director of the program, Minister Khadebe. Ministers and deputy ministers who are present here, representatives of all sectors, fellow South Africans, good morning to you all. How are you? Thank you for joining us on this important occasion this morning. The year 2014 represents a historic milestone of 20 years of freedom and democracy in our country. It is an occasion to reflect on what has been achieved in our country over the past 20 years by South Africans working together. We have the honor today to release the Presidency's 20-year review which is government's most accurate account of work done in the past 20 years. It is our contribution to the celebration and discussions about the progress made and work that still needs to be done to move South Africa forward. We have had 10 years and 15 years reviews before, which cumulatively contributed to the review document we are launching today. The 20-year review is packed with facts and figures to support its analysis, and it is honest and frank in its approach. Where the facts indicate that we have made progress, we say so. And where the facts indicate that we have challenges and have made mistakes, we also say so. We are releasing the review just 2 months after the passing of the first president of the Democratic Republic of our democracy, South Africa, His Excellency Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. His administration laid the foundation for the transformation of our country from being the skunk of the world to a non-racial, non-sexist, thriving and vibrant constitutional democracy. You will note that the sky on the cover picture of the review document displays a beautiful rainbow. The picture was taken at the Union Building on the second day of Dr. Madiba's lying in state at the Nelson Mandela Amphitheatre. We experienced a brisk storm that afternoon, followed quickly by that rainbow which brightened the sky as if to remind us of the united rainbow nation that Madiba wanted us to be always. We humbly dedicate this review to Madiba. Given the manner in which we were able to pull our country back from the brink of disaster, South Africa is an inspiration to peoples elsewhere in the world who are seeking the resolution of serious conflicts. We are proud of this remarkable achievement. At the political level, we have consolidated our democracy and built strong institutions, as the review indicates. We have representative legislatures, an independent judiciary, independent public audit, an independent reserve bank, and independent constitutional bodies to provide checks and balances and protect the rights of citizens. Thanks to our progressive constitution. We enjoy freedom of movement and of association, the right to own property, the right not to be detained without trial, freedom of expression and freedom of the press, religious freedom and freedom of sexual orientation. Women have equal rights before the law, which did not exist before 1994. Workers have 20 years of enjoying rights, including trade union, workplace organizing, collective bargaining, equal pay for equal work, health and safety, affirmative action, skills development, minimum wages for workers in vulnerable sectors, the right to strike, and the right to peaceful protests. All South Africans have the right to assemble, to demonstrate, to picket, and to present petitions, provided this is done peacefully and unarmed. The review provides evidence of progress also in socio-economic transformation. But the legacy of apartheid that we inherited runs deep and still persists. I will mention just a few examples of what we inherited before giving some highlights of progress made. The systematic dispossession of land under both colonialism and apartheid has left us with highly skewed racial distribution in land ownership and agricultural production, as well as a struggling smallholder farming sector. The system of reserves, which was introduced under colonialism and later reinforced as homelands under apartheid, left a legacy of poverty and underdevelopment in former homeland rural areas. The homeland system was also linked to the migrant labor system. This is one of the root causes of the unrest which we are currently experiencing in our mining sectors. Racial segregation was also enforced in urban areas. In this regard, one of the biggest challenges which the democratic government has faced has been how to address the entrenched apartheid spatial patterns. For an example, many poor people live in townships which are far from their places of work, costing them more to get to work than those with the means. We are also still dealing with the impact of the Bantu education system, which was designed to keep the black majority confined to unskilled labor. The provision of public health services and basic services such as water, sanitation, electricity, and waste removal was also prioritized in white residential areas. This has caused a legacy of enormous backlogs in the infrastructure required to deliver these services. Despite this legacy, we have recorded progress in socio-economic transformation as well. As we indicated in the State of the Nation address last month, on average, the economy has grown at 3.2% a year from 1994 to 2012. This is a marked improvement over pre-1994 growth rates. The number of people in the employment grew by approximately 5.6 million between 1994 and 2013, or by 60%. However, this growth, while most welcomed, is modest compared with other emerging economies. It has also not been adequate to meet the objective of reducing unemployment substantially. The review indicates that the increase in the number of those employed has been offset by the larger increase in the number of people looking for work. The reasons for this include population growth. Another factor is increasing urbanization, which in turn was partly a result of the dismantling of the homeland system and the removal of the past laws. There are also increasing numbers of women looking for work due to advances in gender equality, which is another achievement of democracy and freedom. The review describes the major advances in gender equality that has been achieved since 1994. To move the country forward, government, business and labor need to work together towards sustaining higher economic growth rates in future in order to sustainably reduce unemployment. This is emphasized in the National Development Plan. Positions of power in the economy have become more representative since 1994, encouraged by government's Black economic empowerment and affirmative action policies. These policies will continue until the structural characteristics of apartheid in terms of inequality in ownership, management, and control of the economy, as well as pay, have been addressed. Ladies and gentlemen, since the mid-2000s, government has placed increasing emphasis on economic transformation, such as ports, rail, dams, and power stations. Our growing economy and rising standards of living have resulted in increased demand for road, rail, port, water, electricity, and telecommunication infrastructure. Over the past 5 years, investment in this infrastructure has dramatically increased further. Central coordination of infrastructure delivery through the Presidential Infrastructure Coordination Commission has improved delivery and assists to remove bottlenecks faster. Investment in infrastructure will increase further, including on much needed social infrastructure such as water, electricity, sanitation, schools, colleges, and housing, amongst others. With regards to basic services, it is impressive that a number of municipalities which had little or no pre-existing institutional foundations have been able to deliver basic services to thousands of people who did not have them before in the past 2 decades. Some of the municipalities were geared towards serving a minority before 1994. The focus is now on reaching communities that are still waiting, particularly in informal settlements, in urban areas, and in the remote rural areas. More importantly, the focus is on improving the technical and management expertise of municipalities so that they can function better and also be able to maintain key infrastructure that supplies water and electricity to communities, amongst other services. The review describes the various interventions which are currently being implemented to address these challenges. Ladies and gentlemen, to fight poverty and inequality, as illustrated in detail in the review, a range of pro-poor government policies have been implemented since 1994, which is among South Africa's key achievements. The result is that our country has achieved or is on track to achieve most of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals by 2015. Most of the achievements in reducing extreme levels of income poverty can be ascribed to government's comprehensive social protection programs. This includes extensive income support programs for close to 16 million orphans and vulnerable children, older persons, and people with disability, among others. It also includes access to free education, primary health care, and free basic services to indigent members of our society. I will mention a few examples in which South Africa has made progress. Over 8 million school children are now benefiting from no-fee policies. This has contributed to an increase in secondary school enrollment from 51% in 1994 to around 80% currently. About 9 million children are benefiting from the school feeding scheme, and this has ensured that learners no longer have to study on an empty stomach. While backlogs in school infrastructure remain, thousands of schools have been built and connected to water and electricity supply since 1994. About 370 modern schools were built over the past 5 years. In 2009, we split the education departments into two, focusing on basic and higher education and training, respectively, to ensure an intensive corrective focus in each sector. In the last 5 years, the annual national assessments system was introduced to enable an objective assessment of the education system below grade 12 for the first time. The relatively poor annual national assessment results have demonstrated the extent of the apartheid damage. At the same time, the results also indicate that the system is starting to improve. University enrollment has almost doubled since 1994. There have also been huge increases in enrollments at further education and training colleges, following an intensive focus on these colleges in the past 5 years. The racial and gender composition of the student body has been markedly transformed since 1994. Government has been working on challenges in the FET sector to improve pass rates and change industry perceptions about the colleges. Investment in education is significantly because education is central to development. It is the primary vehicle by which children of the poor can lift themselves out of poverty and obtain the means to participate meaningfully in the economy and in society. Compatriots, as most of you are aware, there have been great improvements in access to healthcare services as well since 1994. In addition to free basic health care, more than 1,500 healthcare facilities have been built and existing ones have been renovated, revitalized over the past 20 years. One of the major challenges that confronted the democratic government was the rapid rise in the HIV epidemic. The country's improved response to HIV and AIDS and TB has resulted in dramatic improvements in health outcomes, such as increased life expectancy, reduced infant and child mortality rates, and tuberculosis treatment outcomes. South Africa's HIV and AIDS response has now received international acclaim. There are also been significant reduction in malaria cases and deaths due to malaria. Severe malnutrition has also significantly declined. Despite this progress, we must still improve the quality of care in the public health sector and also attend to the increasing private healthcare costs. Compatriots, with regards to housing, over the past 20 years, about 2.8 million government-subsidized houses and over 175,000 serviced sites were delivered. This enabled more than 12 million people access to accommodation and an asset. 56% of all housing subsidies allocated have been to women-headed households. The proportion of people living in informal housing increased from 64% in 1996 to 77% in 2011. Ladies and gentlemen, the question of land remains a fundamental issue for those who were dispossessed in 1913. In 1994, 83% of agricultural land was owned by whites, with only 17% being available to the black majority in the former homelands. Government introduced the Land Restitution Program in 1994. Since then, government has redistributed 9.4 million hectares of land, benefiting almost 250,000 people. The target had been 30% of the agricultural land owned by white South Africans. As the review indicates, only 24% of black households are involved in agriculture, and very few commercial farms are owned by black people. A land audit has been completed which will assist to identify further land for reform purposes. Some laws are being finalized which will assist to improve the pace in the implementation of the land reform program. These include improving and valuation mechanisms and also reopening land claim opportunities for claimants who missed the opportunity in 1998. With regards to safety and security, the levels of serious crime and property crime have declined since 1994. However, crime levels remain high, particularly crime against vulnerable groups such as women and children, which require continued intensive focus. A range of institutions, laws and measures have been put in place since 1994 to counter corruption. These are now being strengthened by implementing measures such as preventing public servants from doing business with the state and better management of the risks related to government procurement processes. Corruption is not only a public sector problem, and the country response has to include the private sector as well. Compatriots, we have made good progress in building social cohesion and promoting a new single nation identity, and work is continuing in this regard. The biggest barrier to further increasing social cohesion is the remaining inequality in society, which needs to be attended to further. Going forward, we should commit to working together further to implement the National Development Plan to deal with remaining challenges and take our country forward. South Africa is a successful story. South Africa is a good story. We have succeeded because of the hard work of all our people who contributed in various ways to rebuilding their country. We are honored to place before the country this 20-year review, which provides evidence in this regard. We humbly thank South Africans from all walks of life for their contribution to the successes that our country has scored. We also thank all those who participated in producing this 20-year review throughout the country. I invite South Africans to engage with this review. We trust that it will be useful in assessing the path we have traveled thus far and in moving the country forward. Compatriots, in 1993, a former ANC president, Oliver Tambo's funeral, former President Nelson Mandela stated, and I quote, "Oliver Tambo has not died because the ideals of freedom, human dignity, and a color-blind respect for every individual cannot perish," unquote. We say the same about Madiba. Dada has not died because the ideals he stood for will live forever. These ideals, which are enshrined in the country's constitution and in the Freedom Charter, we will carry forward as we continue our mission to building a united, non-racial, non-sexist, and prosperous South Africa. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President, for that elaboration of the journey since 1994. Dr. Sean Phillips is the Director General in the Presidency responsible for performance monitoring and evaluation. He has been very pivotal in the compilation of this 20-year review that the President has just outlined to the South African nation. He is the man who knows the nuts and bolts. So it is my honor right now to call upon Dr. Phillips to make a presentation, and I'll request His Excellency, the President, and my colleague, Minister Molewa, to be seated because it's going to be a PowerPoint presentation. Thank you.
President, Ministers, Deputy Ministers, colleagues from government, distinguished guests. I'd like to start by giving you a little background on the process of producing the review. As the President mentioned, the review draws on a great deal of previous research done by government, including the 10-year review, the 15-year review, and all the planning work and diagnostic work of the National Planning Commission. In the process of producing the review, we obtained written inputs from many different national government departments, from all 9 provincial governments, as well as from the South African Local Government Association. We also had a series of roundtable discussions on various topics in the 20-year review with a range of stakeholders, including people from business, academia, and civil society. The next step was to produce 21 background papers, which were written by officials in the Presidency, as well as officials from other government departments, such as the Department of Economic Development, the Department of Justice, Health, and the Department of International Relations. And these background papers were subjected to independent peer review. Drawing on the background papers, a group of government officials then wrote the 20-year review, which is before you, under the supervision of an interministerial committee and cabinet itself. Each chapter of the review follows a similar format, in that it starts by summarizing what democratic South Africa inherited in 1994, then going on to describe the journey since 1994, including progress in transforming society and addressing the legacy of apartheid, and also identifying challenges and governments' and society's plans to address these challenges, particularly drawing on the content of the National Development Plan. The presentation that I'm making to you now is just going to focus on giving you a high-level outline of the range of topics that are covered in each of the chapters of the review. The President has covered the fact that in the introduction, we give an overview of the legacy of the colonial and apartheid past, particularly those aspects of the past which are still affecting us today. The introduction also covers the democratic transition, the negotiation process and the agreements which were reached during that time, such as the agreement on constitutional principles, which also has an impact on South Africa today. The introduction then also includes a section on the 20 years in brief. It describes the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the 1996 Constitution, and the Reconstruction and Development Programme, which has laid the basis for future government policies. It then gives an overview of the key findings of the other chapters, basically the short story of the 20-year review. Chapter 2 covers governance and administration and describes the development of the institutions of representative democracy after 1994, Parliament and the provincial legislatures and the constitutional Chapter 9 and Chapter 10 bodies, the establishment of an independent judiciary, and the process of amalgamating and rationalizing the fragmented, multiple apartheid-era administrations which were inherited in 1994 into a unified public service with three spheres of government. It also describes the progress and the challenges since 1994 in terms of management of this new three-sphere intergovernmental system, and also with regard to intergovernmental coordination, both horizontally and vertically. It discusses the vast improvements that have been made in terms of representation of women in the legislation and the executive, and as indicated by the President, the improvements that South Africa has seen in human rights such as freedom of association, freedom of speech, the freedom to demonstrate, freedom of movement, and the right not to be detained without trial, to mention just a few. This chapter also describes the process of modernizing the legal frameworks governing the public service, such as the Public Finance Management Act and the new Public Service Act, which were introduced after 1994, and the process of transforming the public service, in particular in making sure that it becomes more representative of the population. There are also sections which discuss the performance of the public service, challenges with performance in some areas, and improvements of performance of the public service in other areas, and ongoing efforts to further improve the performance of the public service. It also covers improvements and changes in generic management processes in government, such as financial management, planning, and coordination.
Welcome to the Sefako Makato Presidential Guest House, where we've seen President Jacob Zuma launching the 20-year review document, which basically highlighted some of the successes that the government has been able to achieve in the past 2 decades. With me, I've got a political analyst, Dr. Somadoda Vikeni. Doctor, thanks very much for your time. President starting to say that the review has been honest and frank in terms of acknowledging successes and challenges facing the government. Do you agree?
Well, I do think that he does amplify the successes and also make a cursory reference to some of the challenges. Of course, in an election year, you wouldn't expect that, and also the celebration of 20 years, they would dwell too much on the problems, though there has been an anecdotal reference to those. But in the main, it's a positive outlook that is being presented with substance and figures which are being presented. But the deep structural, systemic and historical problems facing the country, one would have hoped that he would also take us through that to say in the promised second phase of this transition, which is supposed to focus on socio-economic justice issues and the current economic challenges, what would be the steps building on what has been achieved?
Obviously, this document will be given to the public out there to interrogate it. Do you think that South Africans should take kind in terms of making sure that they study the document, and do you think it could change the perceptions about those critics who are very much critical about this, the level of governance and the issue relating to service delivery in our country?
Surely, if the public is engaged and they read some of the facts, they will know that indeed the 20 years, there's no one who can ignore that nothing has happened. A lot has happened. The question is those areas which remain stubborn, such as unemployment, poverty, and the apartheid geography in terms of settlement. Those are the areas that the public will say also the rising cost of living currently. But that document will provide a more balanced approach to say, yes, we've made this progress. Here are the weaknesses, rather than the position which either say that everything is good and well, or everything is simply bad. And those two extreme positions do not reflect the reality that we've gone through.
Like you rightly said, that the launch of this document coincides with this era or the time when these elections, the hype is too much for politicians. Do you think this is the opportunity to present the ruling party in a good light?
Well, I do think that it builds to what was presented in the ANC manifesto and in the January 8th statement to say we have achieved Therefore, the narrative seemed to carry from that spot, and as such, the opposition will try to poke holes in the process. But again, any country, when you reach certain milestones and anniversaries, you often project the most positive achievements.
Thank you very much. That's Dr. Somadoda Fikeni, the political analyst, who's also present here to really witness the launch of these historic documents, and is now back to our studio in Auckland Park.
After 1994 and compared to pre-1994, the balance of payments, trade and tourism, and the progress with regard to fiscal and monetary policy, including improvements to the budget balance after 1994, the government's counter-cyclical fiscal policy, and our experience of monetary policy since 1994. Employment and unemployment are also covered, as mentioned by the President. Trade and industrial policy and competition policy, support to SMMEs, broad-based black economic empowerment, labour market policy and labour market institutions, and innovation, research and development. The next chapter is on infrastructure, which starts by describing the impact of apartheid-era infrastructure decisions, particularly the overinvestment in certain types of economic infrastructure and underinvestment in social infrastructure. It describes the key role of infrastructure in driving economic growth and job creation and bringing about equality and access to services, and how, particularly in the second decade after 1994, new demands for infrastructure have resulted from the growing economy and increased utilization of infrastructure by more people than that infrastructure was originally designed for. It also describes the economic infrastructure constraints to growth, which started to emerge at around 2000, and the plans that have been put in place and are being implemented to address these. It further describes the steps that have been taken by government to improve infrastructure delivery, given its emphasis on investment in infrastructure, including the medium-term expenditure framework, which allows for multi-year planning of infrastructure projects, the Construction Industry Development Board, the introduction of social infrastructure grants to the provinces and municipalities from the national government, and public-private partnerships. It describes the remarkable progress which has been made in improving social infrastructure such as basic education and health and housing, the marked increase in economic infrastructure and investment since 2000, and then it has a section where we deal sector by sector with an analysis of progress since 1994, covering electricity, transport, including freight rail, commuter rail, ports, pipelines, roads, taxis and buses and aviation, bulk water supply and communications. There's also a section in the infrastructure chapter on the challenges related particularly to economic infrastructure and how these are being addressed, including measures to improve infrastructure planning and coordination, one of which is the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission, and issues related to market structure, regulation and pricing with regard to economic infrastructure in particular, and challenges with regard to the financing of infrastructure and how these are being addressed. Chapter 6 covers sustainable development and points out that the challenge has been to ensure that we pursue economic growth and poverty reduction and employment creation while at the same time ensuring the long-term sustainability of natural systems and the environment. It describes how since 1994 a range of environmental legislation and regulations have been put in effect, and notes that the challenge moving forward is to focus on implementing those legislation and regulations. It then covers various areas of sustainable development, including water resource management, including the issues of demand management, water pollution and the country's response to water pollution, management of the mining sector's impact on the environment, water use efficiency management for the agricultural sector, and backlogs in water use licenses. It covers air quality management, the renewable energy program, climate change mitigation and adaptation, including the conferences, international conferences in that regard, which have been held in South Africa, and South Africa's contribution to them, issues of emission reduction and the development of the green economy. It also covers conservation and biodiversity, waste management, and the role of business and civil society in sustainable development. The next chapter is on safety and security, which includes the shift towards safety and security since 1994, with an emphasis on legitimacy, accountability, and the effectiveness of the security and criminal justice functions in comparison to the approach to safety and security before 1994. It also describes how the administration of justice has been transformed in line with the Constitution, the establishment of the representative judiciary, the vesting of judicial authority in the courts, and the establishment of the Constitutional Court. There's also a section on improved access to justice since 1994, progress towards the development of an integrated justice system, and improving the efficiency of the criminal justice system. There's also a section on combating corruption within the JCPS system itself. There's a discussion on the trends in crime rates since 1994, and a particular focus on gender-based violence and sexual offences against vulnerable groups. The policy and legislative framework and institutions that have been put in place since 1994 to combat corruption in the private and public sectors are also covered, as is the partnerships that have been implemented between government, business and civil society to address crime as well as corruption. There's a discussion of the socio-economic determinants of crime, and following from, related to that, the role of society in combating crime and corruption. Finally, Chapter 8 looks at South Africa in the global arena and the process of establishing relationships and partnerships after 1994, having moved from being an isolated country to being a respected and active member of the international community. It covers the pursuit of the African agenda since 1994, South Africa's contribution to strengthening of the African Union and its structures and the African Union's commitment to democracy, NEPAD, the Pan-African Infrastructure Development Fund and the Presidential Infrastructure Championing Initiative, the African Peer Review Mechanism, South Africa's contribution towards promoting democracy and economic growth on the African continent, as well as peace, security and stability, and our role in working towards African multilateral partnerships internationally. There's also a section on the process of strengthening SADC and regional integration, and a discussion on the Southern African Customs Union. There's a section on South-South cooperation, including IBSA, the India, Brazil, South Africa partnership, and BRICS. And there's also a section on North-South cooperation, including the OECD, the G8, the G20, and the European Union. In addition, there's a section on multilateralism and institutions of global governance, including South Africa's involvement in the United Nations, and particularly our pursuit through our involvement in the United Nations of nuclear disarmament and non-proliferation since 1994. In the international chapter, there's also a section on trade and investment, which describes how South Africa's export patterns have changed since 1994, our trends in exports, and also the trends in foreign direct investment. Finally, Chairperson, there are various plans to communicate the 20-year review, which is being released today. For example, the review is now on the Presidency and DPME websites and can be downloaded in PDF format. GCIS will be putting inserts into Vuk'uzenzele about the 20-year review. We plan to have engagements on community radio stations, and we are planning to have a series of development dialogues with stakeholders and academic and research institutions to promote discussions on the various themes in the 20-year review. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sean, for the comprehensive summary of the 20-year review. Now that we still have some time, I will allow a few questions, 2 or 3, based on the presentation by the President and the PowerPoint presentation by Dr. Sean Phillips. I will not accept questions such as the parliamentary list of the ANC, etc. So if there are any comments or a few questions, now is the opportunity. If you can indicate who you are before you ask the question or you make a comment. I must indicate that there are various cabinet colleagues who are here. We have already seen Minister Molewa, the Minister of Water, as well as Environmental Affairs, the Minister of Economic Development, Patel, the Minister of Social Development, Batabile Dlamini, the Deputy Minister of Higher Education and Training, Manana, and other senior government officials who have been intimately involved in this journey that the President has outlined today. Mr. Simelane.
Thank you, Minister Khadebe. I'll probably be killed for this. President and other cabinet ministers, in the context of the 20-year review, could the President take us into confidence and sort of talk about South Africa's evolution in terms of the foreign policy aspects? How did we get to a point where, in this day and age, in 2014, we're having difficulties with a sister nation on the African continent, that being Rwanda? Could the President sort of track back how our foreign policy has evolved and also how we're going to deal with this particular situation?
Azar Jamin.
Azar Jamin from Econometrics. I would like to congratulate the Presidency for this incredible review and the work. Congratulations for the excellent work that appears to have been done. And I think that this can be used as a wonderful marketing tool for the country and its image abroad. Having said that, how do we relate these achievements to the fact that we keep seeing springing up of protests left, right, and center, precisely on the basis that there is dissatisfaction with service delivery? How do we buy the population into accepting and recognizing the progress that we've made and encouraging them to have the patience to actually reap the benefits thereof? Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am, from New Age, I think.
With regards to electricity, this review indicates that 5.8 million poor households has received access to electricity over the last 20 years. But Mr. President, you have to take into consideration that this last week we've seen a huge setback when it comes to energy and electricity. If perhaps we could be able to say how come 20 years on we're still seeing major setbacks in the capacity Eskom has to provide electricity to the masses. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, on my line of flight, so I can't see who you are.
Thank you, Somadoda
Yeah,
Fikeni.
Fikeni, yes.
Yes. I absorb light, that is the problem. Again, let me just join those who acknowledge the work done. Mine is a very simple question. In terms of maintenance of things that have been done, let's say electrification, water provision, and so forth, do we have an audit of that which still works, or those which have broken down because of poor maintenance, in which case you'd say 3 million provided, but it so happened that maybe 200,000 is no longer functional in a sense, which creates the frustration that people had tested something and now it's no longer available. Or it might be because of the cost of living going up, it's no longer affordable. Thank you.
Thanks. Daily Maverick.
My name is Ranjani from the Daily Maverick. Mr. President, now that you have this 20-year review, if you could please tell us, presuming that you will be still president after the election, what will be the things that you would look back and feel went wrong over the past 20 years, and particularly during your administration, and what will be the key things that you would want to get right in the next administration? Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yeah, also in my line of light.
Thank you. My name is Warren Mabona from the Citizen newspaper. I would like to know, the president has mentioned the NDP as saying that the government will still use the plan in order to grow the economy. Now, given the fact that there are some tensions within the tripartite alliance, especially NUMSA saying that it will not vote for the ANC if it uses the government uses the NDP. So what does the president think of that? And also he mentioned the fact that there's many municipalities have been able to provide services to thousands of people. Now, given the fact that South Africa has been bedeviled by many protests, service delivery protests, so what does the president have to say about this?
Thanks. I'll take the last question. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Minister Khatebe. Vukanim from independent newspapers. I have two quick questions. Both of them are fairly simple. The first is a conceptual one. In monitoring the performance of the economy, you seem to have drawn a comparison between the post-1994 economy and the pre-1994 economic performance. I just want to know if this is a legitimate matrix of measuring progress. Should we not be measuring progress? Because we know that the apartheid economy was not growing. So if you're measuring progress, should we not be looking at other ways of measuring progress? On education, we've rolled out one of the largest AIDS treatment campaigns in the world that allow us and require us to measure the progress of each individual patient and whether they take their treatment and how they respond to treatment. And yet on education, we have this phenomenon where we are losing our children through the education system, where, for instance, you have children, about 900,000 entering the education system as 6-year-olds, but only about 400,000 or 500,000 right matric. Why have we never developed a system to monitor each child and each child's progress through the education system and make the necessary interventions where children disappear through the years? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the questions. So I'm at your pleasure, Mr. President. I'm suggesting that maybe Sean Phillips will deal with the last questions about the legitimacy of the metrics that is being used as a conceptual framework of developing this 20-year review, as well as Deputy Minister of Higher Education on the issues of education. And then on the issue of maintenance, Minister Patel. On the issues of electricity as well. On the issues of service delivery, Minister Molewa. And then I'll leave the issues of foreign policy to the President, as well as the tensions within the alliance arising from the different opinions on the National Development Plan. So maybe in that order. Dr. Phillips.
Thank you, Minister. With regard to the question about the way in which the approach that we've taken to the review, it would really be ahistorical to look at the progress since 1994 without looking at what we inherited in 1994, because a lot of that legacy is still with us today and affects how we go about developing the country. But we haven't only looked at progress post-1994 vis-à-vis pre-1994, particularly in the area mentioned, which is in terms of economic development. When you read the detail of the review, you'll see that we do also look at our aspects such as the economic growth rate in comparison to other similar countries. And we do note that our economic growth rate should be higher in comparison to other similar countries, even though our growth rate is higher compared to pre-1994. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. With the question related to education, I think with the introduction of the annual assessments, we are in a position now to monitor the progress in a standard way, the progress of our children in the schooling system. So I think the situation will indeed improve for the better. Thank you very much.
Thank you, colleague. Two questions. First on Somadoda. Over the last 15 years or so, we've been doing periodic assessments of maintenance. Cabinet, at its recently hotla, decided we must now do an annual assessment of maintenance because it's critical as we build the base of infrastructure that we also maintain that. So a much greater part of the national infrastructure plan will be on maintenance. But I want to use the opportunity, colleague, just to also respond to the new age question on electricity. You know, the story that's set in here, our progress has been even more dramatic. In 1994, on electricity, we inherited an installed capacity at household levels. In other words, the number of houses that we electrified of 5.2 million. In less than the 20 years of the democracy, in other words, just going up to 2011, the census year, we had added an additional just over 7 million households to the energy grid. So we did more in less than 20 years than the preceding 104 years, because electricity was introduced at household level in 1890. Now that, of course, means that you've got to ramp up your energy generating capacity. What we're doing right now is the country's biggest new build of energy generation. Kusile, Medupi, Ingula, and Africa's biggest green energy program. So if you take that together, over the next 15 years, 20 years, we'll basically be doubling the energy generating capacity of the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have been asked to speak to a question related